Welcome to the History of European Theatre podcast, and thanks for joining me on this journey through millennia of theatrical history. Episode 142, The Culture of the Shrew in Early Modern Europe, a conversation with Dr. Natália Pikli. While I was researching the early Shakespeare plays, I came across a paper that discussed how the concept of the shrewish wife had changed in Europe since medieval times up to the advent of Shakespeare's play, which provided some useful insights as I thought about my view of the Taming of the Shrew. Having completed my look at the earliest Shakespeare plays, I was very pleased that the author of this paper, Dr. Natália Pikli, agreed to talk about the view of shrews and women in early modern England, and how Shakespeare's contemporaries might have viewed not only the story of the taming of a woman, but about how attitudes to and of women are on display in the other early comedies. As you will hear, our conversation was not just about shrewish women, but about men too, not to mention the falcons and the horses. You will hear passing reference to a couple of contemporary works that I discussed more fully in the episode on the Taming of the Shrew, particularly a play called The Taming of a Shrew, which Shakespeare may have used as a source, had a hand in himself, or been influenced by, and the popular ballad A Merry Jest of a Shrewd and Cussed Wife Wrapped in a Moral Skin for Her Good Behaviour, one of many stories about the taming of a disobedient wife that were circulating about the same time. If you missed the episode on the Taming of the Shrew, it would be a good idea to go back and listen to that before continuing here. It's episode 133, that's season 6, episode 20, in the podcast feed. Dr. Natália Pikli is Associate Professor at the Department of English Studies, Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest. She teaches medieval and early modern culture and literature and is head of the PhD programme. She also teaches contemporary popular culture as well as theatre history and theatre reviewing for students majoring in theatre studies. She's published extensively on Shakespeare, early modern popular culture, theatre, iconography, and on the reception of Shakespeare in contemporary theatre. Her book chapters and articles have appeared in many Shakespearean and early modern English journals. She has co-edited 5 books and is the author of 2 monographs, The Prism of Laughter, Shakespeare's Very Tragical Mirth, and Shakespeare's Hobby Horse and Early Modern Popular Culture. In her free time, she directs amateur student productions and writes theatre reviews. I spoke to Natalia over Zoom from Chicago, where she is currently engaged in research for her latest project. So the idea of the shrew is a concept that has changed a bit over time. I was wondering if you could give us an idea of how that concept came about and what preconceptions Shakespeare's contemporary audience might have gone into the theatre with when they saw the title of his Taming of the Shrew.
Well, it's a very good question, and I'm so happy to be here and share this my research with you. So thank you for inviting me. Well, the shrew was a complicated and a many-layered concept in Shakespeare's time, and Shakespeare knew this when he was writing the play and when he returned to this concept. So just to start from the beginning, originally the shrew was a rodent, a species of a rodent. But already in the 13th century, it acquired other meanings like a bad person, somebody with a very bad behavior, also somebody who has a demonic kind of an approach to things, and in the 14th century, so by the time we come to Chaucer, the shrew as a word is being used to people with bad behavior generally, and it's applied to men and women equally. So in the Wife of Bath's prologue and tale, you can hear the wife of Bath herself, who is a shrew herself, also referring to one of her husbands as a shrew. So it was not gender specific, and it lasted till Shakespeare's time. So even in the Taming of the Shrew by William Shakespeare, the text that we know from the first folio, it is Petruchio also who is called a shrew and not just Kate. So both Petruchio and Kate are called shrews, and they are both associated with, kind of a demonic possession. Petruchio is called the devil, and Kate is called the devil's dam. So this kind of a demonization of somebody who does not conform to the norms of society was very much a living concept in Shakespeare's time, and it was connected to the idea of the shrew. On the other hand, the shrew was also a little rodent, a mouse-like creature, and according to the natural lore of the time, which was recorded in Edward Topsell's book, The History of Four-Footed Beasts, published in 1607, the shrew mouse is an evil creature. It bites you, and its bite is poisonous. And it is not only an evil creature, but it hates everybody and every creature hates the shrew. And it can only be avoided, but once it bites you, the shrew bite can only be cured by a kind of a homeopathic medicine. So you have to have an ash tree, and in this ash tree you have to put a dead shrew, and then the bark of that ash tree can cure the bite of the evil shrew. And to top it, the shrew feigns to be gentle. So it pretends to be nice and, not biting, and then it bites you. So all this is a part and parcel of what Shakespeare had in mind, and Shakespeare's contemporaries had in mind when they heard the term shrew. On the other hand, the title of the play is very important. The taming is another aspect of the play that can be and should be considered from several viewpoints. First and foremost, the taming of unruly women and the taming of unruly horses went hand in hand at that time in early modern England, as well as in early modern Hungary, or in early modern Europe in general, because, well, there are several points of contact here. One point of contact is that the mouth is very important. So in order to control a horse, an unruly horse, you have to have a bridle, and the bridle is the device that keeps the horse controlled first and foremost. So the unruly horse has to be bridled, as well as unruly woman. As an unruly woman has to be bridled, because the woman's major weapon is her tongue. And we even have this very quite horrific device of punishment, actually device of torture, the scourge bridle, which was put on the head of misbehaving women, and it had a kind of a spike that went into the mouth and held the tongue down. We have only a later pictorial depiction of this from 1625. In a book published in Shakespeare's England, but there are a lot of references to it, not only in Shakespeare, but in Ben Jonson's plays and other contemporary plays as well. So this idea of controlling the mouth, the tongue of the woman, and controlling the mouth of the horse went hand in hand. And, well, in general terms, we could say that, riding a horse, even today, it means controlling a very passionate and very powerful animal full of emotions and energy. And it has sexual connotations, of course. Yes. but also it is something that was very often pictured in Shakespeare's time as reason ruling over passion. So even in the Two Noble Kinsmen, which is partly Fletcher, partly Shakespeare, or in other plays of the time and other pamphlets and writings of the time, you very often find the idea of the male rider ruling over the horse, and it's associated with, taming the passions and taming everything that is associated with unruliness.
Right. There are also plenty of references in the play to training in terms of falconry as well.
Yes, and that's where Shakespeare, deviates from contemporary discourses a little bit, because Taming of Falcon was considered not only an aristocratic pastime, but also something different from taming a horse. You can beat a horse, which actually happens in the ballad that you mentioned, in the merry jest of a cursed and shrewd wife left in Morella's skin. So you can beat up a horse to tame it, but you cannot beat up a falcon. A falcon is a wild but a proud animal at the same time. And it can be tamed. It has to be tamed to some extent, but its liberty cannot be taken away absolutely, because then it ceases to function as a useful hunting bird. So the falcons of the time were tamed by denying food and sleep from them. And this is what happens to Kate during their honeymoon, and honeymoon in quotation marks.
Definitely.
But this is different from beating up somebody. And I think this is something that is very important in Shakespeare's play, that Shakespeare uses all the contemporary discourses on shrew taming, on the shrews, on animal taming, horse taming, falcon taming, but he creates a kind of a mixture in his plays, and I'm talking about the folio version. of the play, which is very interesting because it is open to several different interpretations. And because, for instance, Petruchio never beats up his wife.
Right,
Kate.
yes, no
never
physical
even touches, physically, never even touches her. And there is one moment when they first meet, their first rendezvous, which is a very stormy one, then there is a moment when Kate slaps Petruchio, so gives a box on the ear. And that's when Petruchio says, don't do this anymore, or don't do it again, because I will strike you. But then he never strikes her. And so physical beating never happens in the play, which is quite a deviation from the other shrew taming discourses of the time, as well as the falconry simile. And actually, Petruchio refers to taming of falcon in his speech when he's sharing his ideas of taming with the audience. So it's quite foregrounded. But to put it very simply, The Taming of the Shrew is a play which can be interpreted in several different ways if we look at it very closely. And Kate's last speech is the Archimedean point. So the way you interpret it, the way you take it, is the way you understand the play. If you take it at face value and you say that, well, Kate is absolutely tamed and she believes everything that she is, that she's performing for an audience, then it's a very misogynistic play. But if you take into consideration something that you already mentioned in your podcast, that it is actually a play within a play. So the story of Kate and Petruchio and Bianca and Lucentio and all the others is a performance within a performance. It is performed for Sly, Christopher Sly. So we have actors doing something. So the performative aspect is so strong in the play that you might have your doubts that, especially because the speech, Kate's speech, is so well done. It's a rhetorically perfect speech. It's an oration on the duties of wife according to the norms of the time, according to the Bible and according to all the household manuals and all the other conduct books and normative texts that define how a wife should behave in the time. It's just too perfect. And the last line, when Kate says that I'm placing my hand under your foot, this is something that was never done in marriage rituals, even at that time. So it's a bit over the top, if you know what I mean. So you might have your suspicions that it is a set speech and it is a performance. And if it is a performance, then Kate is just performing it and not believing it, that means that she has agency. So, and this happens a little bit before when, with the sun and moon and young woman and old man, kind of a brainwashing episode. When finally Kate says that, okay, if you say it's the moon, I will say it is the moon. If you say it is the sun, I will say it is the sun, whatever you wish. And this is the point from which is a turning point, because from this point on, Petruchio will never know how honest Kate is. And this way, she gets her agency back. And we can also read it romantically and say that it is a performance, both the speech and this brainwashing. So after what happens after this, kind of a brainwashing episode, if it is a performance by both Petruchio and Kate, then there is a romantic underlying love possibility of it for the two of them. If it's only a performance on part of Kate, then she's the winner. So there are at least 3 different interpretations to the play, as I see it, if you look more closely.
Yes, no, that's very interesting. And just to pick up on the point of how his contemporaries might have seen that adds a lot of nuance, but it depends on how much agency women generally had in the period, which is one of the hardest things for us to understand, I think, because it's never discussed very much in books written by men and monks and the like. And then you have the character of Bianca, who is on the face of it a direct opposite of what Kate is being. But actually, in the end, she turns out to be somewhat of a shrew at the end, certainly not behaving towards her husband in exactly the way we might expect if she really is this paragon.
Yeah, but definitely not obedient, not behaving as an obedient wife. So yes, Bianca is ironic, pretending to be, the model picture of a silent, obedient daughter and wife, and proving out to be just the opposite. Whereas Kate is is an independent woman. So that's how I see her. Because the very first moment when we meet Kate, she is somebody who is being mistreated by men. So the first time that we see Kate, it is Baptista, the father, and the suitors of Bianca, and of course Bianca is there, but the father and the suitors are talking about how Kate is an obstacle.
Yeah.
And needs to be, something needs to be done with her, and they don't give her the respect, any due respect that should be due to a woman of her social positioning. And Kate, the very first words of Kate are actually quite polite. So she says that you please, treat me as an equal, or treat me as a woman of my social position, and treat me with respect. And only after they start joking about her, like not to court her but cart her, rather,
yes.
Then she says, "Don't make a stale out of me." And stale was again a word that could refer to a prostitute, and could refer to a laughing stock, so somebody who is being laughed at. And even when Petruchio first talks to Kate, he's not being very polite. So he addresses her as Kate, and this is not the way to address a gentlewoman of her status,
Right. Yeah.
And when Kate says that I don't know you, so please talk to me, with respect, then Petruchio launches a longer monologue about Kates and Kates and Kates and Kates and Kate, so calling her Kate like 7 times, and that's where their war begins. Actually, the battle of the sexes begins. But if you look at Kate as somebody who does not fit the norms of the time and would just like to be left alone, then that gives another kind of an interpretation to what is happening to her.
So again, the contemporary audience may have found that speech, the repetition of Kate and Kate and Kate, very amusing in itself, because it would have been an abnormal behaviour for them, and the kind of thing that maybe we don't pick up on because we don't understand enough about their social norms at the time.
Yes, the social norms. So on one hand, they were quite aware of the social norms. So they heard the Bible, every Sunday, and Saint Paul's, letters to the Ephesians, which said that the wife must be ruled by the husband, and so on and so on. And they read about this in conduct books, in emblems. The silent, obedient, and patient wife was the norm. But on the hand, there was reality, and there was a woman on the throne, Elizabeth I, exception to the rule. And I'm not, talking about Elizabeth I now, but she did have to resort to some very interesting means to keep her position and respect for her, in such a male-dominated world. But reality always overrides the norms. And even in those times, some women did have, or quite a lot of women did have agency. They were literate, and they. So they did not completely conform to the norms that were expected of them.
Yes, exactly. And I think we see that in some of the other early comedies as well. The female characters in Comedy of Errors, for example, are quite strong female characters.
Yeah. I was so happy to hear that you mentioned the dialogue between Luciana and Adriana, the wife and the unwedded sister, because it's such a clear picture of the norms as told by Luciana, the unwedded sister, and the defiance of the norms and the reality of being in a marriage by Adriana. And Adriana is termed a shrew. Of course, it's a patriarchal society, so anybody who does not conform to the norms is termed or stigmatized in some way, this way as a shrew. But the dialogue of these two sisters very clearly shows how the two sides of the coin coexisted at the time.
Not sure we could pick out anything from Two Gentlemen of Verona in quite the same way, because the female characters there are, it's a difficult play as a whole, I think.
It is, and it's. I think the Two Gentlemen of Verona was the first. So we are at the beginning of Shakespeare's career, and actually all these early pieces are like exam pieces, so to say. So he's trying to prove himself that I can do this, I can do that, I can do a farce based on Plautus, like the Menachmi, the Amphitrio, and put the two together into the Comedy of Errors, and double the twins. So I can do even more with Titus Andronicus, that I can do revenge tragedy, I can do Seneca, I can do Ovid, I can do all my humanist erudition, and put it into a play. and then you have the Two Gentlemen of Verona, which I think is his very first attempt at romantic comedy, which will later be seen in such masterpieces as A Midsummer Night's Dream or Much Ado About Nothing, or As You Like It. So it's kind of, as a young budding writer trying to try his hand in different genres and different approaches to theatre that we see. And I think The Two Gentlemen of Verona is not a very successful piece. There are some nice moments, but it's not the best play of Shakespeare.
Yes, and both that and Taming of the Shrew as well probably suffer that we don't have better copies of them. I mean, we have to believe that both were maybe better plays in their fully formed way.
Could be, and also we should never forget about the fact that these are plays which were performed in a theater for a live audience. So what we have is only the notes, the blueprint of a performance. Even if we have the text, or even if we have several versions of the text, like for instance, in case of Romeo and Juliet, we do have 3 different texts of Romeo and Juliet. Yes. And I don't know whether the listeners are aware of this, but it's very peculiar that the very first quarto of Romeo and Juliet, which was printed in 1597 by John Denter and Edward Oldie, has the line that Benvolio is deceased. So Benvolio dies in the very first quarto, but this line is not there in the second quarto and the third quarto and the reprints and the folio text. So whether Benvolio is alive by the end of Romeo and Juliet or not, well, it can vary from performance to performance.
Yeah. And there is quite a lot of examples of things like that, where we have different texts where they vary in small details, but they could make a significant difference to the outcome of the play. Just to go back onto the Taming of the Shrew, this was a European-wide idea, wasn't it? That the shrew was as an animal that then morphs into this meaning of people who can't behave properly, be they male or female, as you've pointed out.
Yeah, well, actually, the shrew or little rodents were often associated with women. Not necessarily with evil women, but definitely with women. Because if you think about a little rodent like a weasel, or in Hungarian, the word for lady, hörgy, was actually a reference to this animal, the weasel.
Really? Okay.
It was, so there is some hint here to the female privy parts as well. So this is a frequent association, but an even stronger association was between women and horses in early modern Europe. How to tame women and how to tame horses, how you ride women and how you ride horses, and reason and versus passion. So this was a very widespread idea at the time.
While I had Natalia on the Zoom call, I took the opportunity to ask her about how Shakespeare became an important figure in Hungarian literature, and as for English speakers, Shakespeare is so revered for his early modern creativity and use of language, how the plays work when translated from early modern English into another language.
Yes, okay, so let's start with the history first, and then we turn to the problem of translation, which is actually a great bonus and profit for us, but I will tell about this later. Okay. So the history, Hungary, just like other Central European countries, like Polish, Czech, Romanian or Slovakian people. So we have a very high respect for Shakespeare because somehow, and now I'm talking about Hungary, but this is quite true of other Central European and Eastern European nations, somehow the idea of Shakespeare is associated with our own national identity. The way it happened in Hungary was that by the end of the 18th century, when Hungarian literary life could start again, we had the Turkish occupation for quite a while, for 150 years, and then the Habsburg rule did not really allow for any professional theater to be established or any independent literary life. And when Hungarian literary life and culture actually started to be revived, that was at the end of the 18th century. And this is the moment when we start translating Shakespeare into Hungarian. Our very first literary persons, Ferenc Kazinczy translated Hamlet, from a German adaptation, but still it was one of the first major translations and one of the first major productions put on a Hungarian stage in Hungarian. And when the first professional theater started in the first decades of the 19th century in Budapest and in Romanian cities like Kolozsvár, Hungarian Shakespeare was a must, already a staple. Very often, these translations came from German adaptations because German was, the language that everybody spoke at the time, if you were a Hungarian educated person, and it had a huge influence. The German, Schlegel translation later on, and generally there was this huge German influence on Hungarian cultural life. But quite early in the 1830s already, we have translations from the original English. It's a Macbeth. Which was first translated, and the translation of Shakespeare into Hungarian became a national project. So our major national poets like János Arany, Sándor Petőfi, Mihály Vörösmarty, these three great romantic poets who defined our national identity, they also started out translating Shakespeare and made it their project, their own project. The three of them should translate the whole of Shakespeare, which never happened because, we had a revolution in 1848 and Petőfi died and Vörösmarty went mad a couple of years later. So the three big ones could not do the whole of Shakespeare, but the project went on and János Arany survived, the War of Independence, and he became the leader of this movement and to translate all of Shakespearean plays into Hungarian by notable translators from a good edition, using some critical remarks from Delius and other critics of the time. And by the 1880s, this was done. So, and ever since then, in the 20th century, our major poets were translating Shakespeare for the theater again and again. So somehow Shakespeare is part of our national identity in Hungary. It's taught in schools, so every school child encounters Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet during their high school years, and they have to read it, learn about it. Some of them might meet A Midsummer Night's Dream too, but Romeo and Juliet is a must, and Hamlet is, well, not compulsory, but strongly recommended. So we have, and the theaters in Hungary are full of Shakespearean performances. So every season we have at least a dozen performances of Shakespeare. Romeo and Juliet being the most popular in the last decades, of course, and Hamlet and The Midsummer Night's Dream, but The Twelfth Night is quite popular too, and also Richard III. So we have our own selection of popular plays, but you can always go and see Shakespeare in the theater in Hungary, no matter what year it is or where you are in the country. So we have this huge respect for Shakespeare, and he's part of our national psyche, so to say. And the translations, actually, we are quite fortunate in the sense that not being a native English speaker, we have the bonus of translating Shakespeare into our own language in our own time. So the major classical translations done by our major poets in the 19th century, they are old to us even now. And there are retranslations which come and translate Shakespeare into our own language. It's very good because think about it. I mean, when Shakespeare was writing his plays and these plays were performed for his contemporaries, it was contemporary language for them. So the experience that we may have as non-native speakers of English in Shakespearean translations, that Shakespeare speaks to us in our own language. Whereas if you are an English native speaker, you listen to a 400-year-old text, which is very difficult to understand. It's a different language. It's early modern English, different rules, grammar, suffixes, whatever. So it's not so easy to understand it. It doesn't feel contemporary to you.
So those 19th century translations by your three major poets, were they done because they saw the benefit of the poetry, or were they working as dramatists?
Mostly as poets. I mean, they were first and foremost poets, and they saw the poetry in it and the genius in it. So that's how. But they were also quite cognizant of the theatrical requirement, especially Arany, who was, the leader of this project till the very end. So I studied one of his Hamlet translation in more detail, and he was quite aware of the theatrical and performative context of the play, and he tried to translate it accordingly. Unfortunately, Pletofy and Vörösmarty died quite early, so they just translated, Pletofy translated Coriolanus and a little bit of Romeo and Juliet, and Vörösmarty translated Julius Caesar and King Lear, and they are brilliant translations. But then they died. In Orange's translation of Hamlet and A Midsummer Night's Dream, you can see how he is aware of the theatrical expectations which are encoded in the text. And later translators of Shakespeare, especially nowadays after the 1990s, are even more aware of this. So our present and best Shakespeare translator, Adam Nadasdy, is a theater person too, and he knows what he's doing when he's trying to give us a text that is good for the actors, works well on stage, and still retains, at least most of the poetry. Although he says that poetry is not so much celebrated today, so he tries to downplay the poetry sometimes, but he doesn't always succeed because the text is so poetic.
Oh, that's great to hear that Shakespeare is alive and well in Hungary.
Very much so. And but we do keep the rhythm. So we have the iambic pentameter and the rhymes. So we keep to the form of the original blank verse, but the language is modern, is contemporary.
So there is some sort of similarity between English and Hungarian. Pentameter obviously still works for you.
Yeah, not similarity, but there is a flexibility in Hungarian language that allows poetry to be very flexible and poetic translations to be very flexible.
Right.
So we can do the actual, Greek and Roman meter. We can do it with accents as you do in English or in Western European languages, and we have our own Hungarian way of poetry. So we can do at least 3 different meters. It's a very flexible language. So form is not that much of a problem for us. As a language, Hungarian is a language which works with quite long words. And that's difficult. So in an iambic pentameter, you have 10 syllables, maybe 11. And love is just 1 syllable. But love in Hungarian is szerelem. That's 3 syllables. So just imagine how difficult it is to translate Romeo and Juliet or A Midsummer Night's Dream, and put everything into the line which is there.
Yes, your translators are obviously doing quite a spectacular job working that one out. My thanks to Natalia for taking the time out from her research to talk to me, and for those additional insights that bring another point of view to those plays. Although they all remain a bit difficult in their own ways, I was particularly struck by Natalia's suggestion there that perhaps these early plays were all quite deliberate exercises that Shakespeare created to flex his literary muscles and to test if he really could work across genres. Perhaps, with that in mind, we can look upon them a little more sympathetically. Next time I will be continuing the biography of Ben Jonson, starting with his origins and early days, where once again the growing Elizabethan school system had a significant impact on one of its brightest students. In the meantime, please join the Facebook page or group, or find the podcast on Instagram or X just to keep up to date with new episodes and other theatre-related things. If you do feel able to help out with the costs of running the podcast, then please head on over to Patreon, where you will find additional content for a small monthly fee or a one-off donation. You can also make a one-off show of support through Ko-fi.com. You can find details of ways to support the podcast on the website, which is at www.thehistoryofeuropeantheatre.com. That's also a great place to get in touch with me if you wish by using the contact form, or you can even leave me a voice message by clicking on the microphone icon. I look forward to your company next time, but if you do have any comments or concerns in the meantime, you can also contact me by email at thoetp@gmail.com or via X at thoetp.